Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's session on cross-platform development options for .NET. My name is Jason Beres. I'm a Senior Vice President at Infragistics, and my email is jasonb@infragistics.com. About me, I have been at Infragistics for just about 20 years. I manage all of the development teams. I'm an author of around 10 books, ranging in topics from SQL Server to C++ to C#, Visual Basic, and even Silverlight. I focus on all of our UX productivity tools, our developer tools, and our BI solutions at Infragistics. You can follow me on Twitter at Jason Beres or follow Infragistics at Infragistics. For a contact in the Korea region, Dong-Soo Jo is our regional sales manager for APAC. You can contact him at djo@infragistics.com or at the number on the slides if you have any questions, if you'd like a download, if you have license questions, or if you need a demo. Infragistics is the maker of App Builder for Blazor, Angular, and React. App Builder is a WYSIWYG drag-and-drop tool that allows you to create screens for Angular, Blazor, and React applications without knowing any CSS or HTML. It's a simple process with a rich toolbox full of UI controls, just like you're building a Windows Forms application, except it's for the web. Visit infragistics.co.kr for more information. And while you're there, look at Infragistics Ultimate, which is our product which covers every major platform that .NET developers care about, from Windows Forms to WPF to Blazor, including WinUI and Uno, a platform we're going to talk about today, and a host of other frameworks that you can use to build out your enterprise applications. I also want to thank the .NET dev community. You are the largest community in Korea, spreading education and guidance to all developers. The community that you are creating is helping not only to promote .NET development, but communication, collaboration, and camaraderie across all developers in Korea. Thank you. And thank you for inviting me to this keynote session today. Today's agenda, why .NET? Why does it matter? We're going to look at some cross-platform framework options that you have, maybe discuss some pros and cons. We'll do a demo, and then we will wrap up the keynote session. So why .NET, and why does it matter? .NET continues to be the most loved framework by developers. Even at being 20 years old, 73% of developers globally in a recent survey voted .NET as their favorite framework. This means it beat out frameworks like Java, React, Angular, and others. .NET supports the programming languages that you care about most, languages like C++, F#, and others. C# is still the most widely used programming language in the enterprise in the world. 1 out of every 3 developers use C# every day, which is pretty impressive, seeing that C# has been around for a very long time and could be considered legacy, but with the revised focus on .NET Core from Microsoft, we're seeing a growth in C# developers. Even after 20 years, adoption is skyrocketing for the latest frameworks. If we look at .NET 6 adoption, there's more than 5.6 million downloads in the first few months of its release. This is 1.8 times larger than the .NET 5 downloads over the same period when it was released. And a lot of this has to do with Visual Studio. Visual Studio continues to be the favorite development platform. It has everything you need, from a great WYSIWYG, great code editing tools, excellent debugging and profiling, and now cross-platform support on the languages and platforms that you care about. So if you have a Mac, you can use Visual Studio, you can use Visual Studio Code, and you can do the same on a PC, and soon you can do the same on ARM devices that are coming from Microsoft. If we look at Visual Studio 2019 versus Visual Studio 2022, there's 1.6 million more downloads of Visual Studio 2022 over the same period of Visual Studio 2019. This is pretty remarkable. Now, what fuels this? .NET is open source. Visual Studio has different versions that are free. So there's no cost to get started to build modern applications on the .NET framework today. And if we look at what you're building for, in the past, maybe 5 years ago, 7 years ago, you had to build Windows Forms, ASP.NET, or WPF applications. Now your world for .NET has dramatically expanded. You can build cloud-first applications, you can build mobile applications, as we're going to see today. You can build games with the Unity framework. You can build IoT apps that live on the edge on devices. And of course, you can build full functional AI models and AI applications deployed to Azure with .NET. Anywhere that you are or anywhere that you want to deploy, you do have an option with .NET. So what is the importance of considering a multi-experience platform? A multi-experience platform is a set of tools or frameworks that allow you to build an application that targets different devices. You're not just building for a Windows machine. You're not just building for the web. You're building for different devices, different architectures. The reason is that building for Windows is no longer the only option for developers. And it's no longer the option that you should think is your only choice. There's more than 1 billion Windows 10 and Windows 11 devices. There's more than 4 billion iPhone and Android devices used daily across the globe. Everything added up together means there's more than 5 billion daily active internet users. So you need more options than just building for Windows. Microsoft recognizes this, and that's where .NET comes in. .NET, since .NET 5 with .NET Core and now .NET 6, soon to be .NET 7 in November of this year, is a cross-platform framework. It is a single base class library that allows you to run .NET applications across different devices. This includes Mac OS, Linux, iOS, Android, WebAssembly, and any modern browser. Your choices have expanded. So, as I mentioned years ago, you may have had limited choices. Now, there is no limit to what you can do with the .NET framework and where you can deploy with your existing skill sets. That means JavaScript, C#, XAML. You can use these languages and capabilities to build and deploy an app to an iPad, to an Android device, and it will run natively, and you'll have native features and capabilities for that device. So, what are your options to build out these cross-platform .NET applications? We're going to talk about 3 options today, and I'm going to do a demo of one of those options. First, I want to talk about the Uno platform. If you've been paying attention to cross-platform development over, let's say, the last 3 or 4 years, you've probably heard of the Uno platform. The Uno platform allows you to run a single code base using C# and XAML to deploy apps to iOS, Android, Mac OS, Linux, web, and Windows. So any platform. You can run a WebAssembly app that runs in the browser, and that exact same code base with the exact same user interface can run as a Windows app or even a native iOS application. On iOS, macOS, and Android, you have native performance. So what's happening is you are actually getting native components rendered natively on those native devices. You're not getting an interop layer that says, I'm going to do some different type of renderer for Android or a least common denominator solution that might not deliver that native experience. The nice thing about Uno is that it's using the MonoWASM runtime. So it's not using Xamarin Forms to build out Uno applications. There is a nice relationship between Xamarin Forms and Uno, but it's not required to build out your apps. And as I mentioned, WebAssembly is a key technology in Uno. With Uno, you can compile applications with ahead of time compilation to WebAssembly that can deploy to different devices. This gives you a lot of flexibility in what you can offer your customers in terms of user experience and device options for applications. The reason I mentioned Mono in the discussion of MAUI and even Blazor hybrid applications is that you're using C# and XAML, which is the key. It doesn't really matter what the framework is. It matters that you can use your existing skill set. Your existing skill set of C# and XAML translates perfectly over to Uno. The nice thing about Uno in practice is that it's a mature open source platform. Uno's been around for a little under 5 years. It targets all major operating system and browsers, and it uses editors like Visual Studio, Visual Studio Code, or Rider for software development. Some of the other nice features of Uno are the built-in theme capabilities across all platforms. There's different extensions that give you additional features, but more importantly, you have native hooks into the operating system. There's a toolkit of UI components with over 50 UI controls, different tools and CLIs and screen builders that accelerate your application development, and even Figma support. So if you're working with a design team that uses Figma and you want to import Figma into an Uno application, you can do that with the Uno platform tools. But again, running on top of this Mono runtime, using C# and XAML, you have the best of all worlds and all platforms with Uno. And of course, I want to highlight again, this is what your Uno application code would look like with the output. So it is exactly what you would expect in a Windows Forms application, or as we'll see later, a MAUI application. Uno ships with a bunch of different samples. You can go to platform.uno/code samples to download different samples to explore your options. My recommendation is before you go down the path of settling on a framework, I would take a look at Uno if you need something that can run cross-platform or you want that native experience. So let's talk about .NET MAUI, or the .NET Multi-Platform App UI. Again, very similar to Uno or vice versa. We could say that you can build native applications on Windows with WinUI, Mac Catalyst for macOS, and iOS and Android with C# and XAML. MAUI abstracts all of these frameworks into a single framework built on .NET 6. And I can't stress this enough. What Microsoft has done with .NET 6, beginning with .NET Core, is they've said we are going to create a runtime that will work across every platform. So if I deploy this application to a Mac, it'll run natively. If I deploy this application to an iOS device, it will run natively. If I deploy it to an Android device, it will run natively. And what the .NET framework is doing is allowing integrations with native components and native renderers on those platforms to give you optimal performance on a per platform basis. You can also optionally hook into device specific options on each platform. So you have all of the capabilities of the device in C# for you. So again, this is a single base class library with a unified type system across all of these CLIs that you get for .NET MAUI. If we look at the specifics of the platform, you've got this unified .NET framework that I've talked about. You've got mobile, desktop, and hybrid options. So you have Android apps, iOS apps, WinUI apps, Mac Catalyst apps, and the Blazor WebView app. So what this does is the Blazor WebView is a native MAUI component that allows you to take a Blazor application, run it inside this component view, and then render it as a native application across devices. You're going to see how that works in my demo. But the exciting thing is there's no limit in your options on major operating systems to deploy to. So when I think about what matters, it would be, can I run this on Android? Can I run this on iOS? The answer is yes, you can, and you can do that from a single project in Visual Studio. And of course, you have nice features just like you would in WPF or Blazor with hot reload, visual diagnostics, profiling, debugging, connecting to native devices to run the application natively for debugging, etc. All of these great development features are available through Visual Studio with MAUI support. So when you open up Visual Studio, and the caveat now is this works with the Visual Studio 2022 preview, you will be able to build MAUI applications, just like you would any other type of application. And when we think about MAUI, I want you to think about this pixel-perfect multi-experience platform. So you can see in this screenshot, we've got applications running in Windows, we have applications running in a Mac, we have applications running on an iPhone and an Android device. I recommend you go to github.com/MAUI samples, check out what's available there and explore some of the code, and you'll be able to see how easy it is to get started building out some pretty robust applications with MAUI that you can deploy to your Android device immediately or run through an emulator on your laptop or desktop PC. And then finally, I want to talk about Blazor Hybrid, which I believe is pretty exciting. And the reason I think Blazor Hybrid is so exciting is because a lot of us need to build web applications today, and we're looking at Blazor. Blazor is sort of this knight in shining armor that gives a .NET developer a fighting chance to build a rich line of business application that can be deployed via a browser. Up until now, our only options were really React and Angular and maybe jQuery before that. ASP.NET Web Forms is legacy, retired, and for the most part not supported, and MVC really isn't a great option for building a line of business application in general. So with Blazor, we can use our existing C# skills, we can use declarative markup, and we can build business applications very easily. The Razor components run natively on the device that you are rendering to. So all of these components render to an embedded web view, the Blazor WebView component that I mentioned earlier, and they have full access to the native capabilities of the device through the .NET framework. So when you're building this Blazor app, you have options for every framework, just like you would if you were just building a MAUI app or even an Uno app, and you can write those custom code pieces that might target something specific for iOS or something specific for Android to get the best of both worlds. I can use my Blazor application or my web skills, and I can build out a native application. So is this really the best of both worlds? I do think it is. I think that a lot of us are shifting to the web, and we, for the most part, need to build web applications for our companies. We don't really have the opportunity to build a iOS or Android only app. We have to build business apps, and our business apps usually are WPF, Windows Forms, are now in the browser. So I can write this application in Blazor, and then as needed in the future, with the capabilities of Blazor Hybrid and .NET MAUI, take that application and deploy it to any device. So it is pretty exciting. There's 100% code reuse between a Blazor application and a Blazor Hybrid application, but the key thing that I want to stress here is it's still a native application on the device. You're not really losing anything. I would say that if you compare a .NET MAUI and a .NET or a Blazor Hybrid application, you might notice that the .NET MAUI application might look a little better. It might feel a little more native. But for the most part, since we write internal business applications, your users really won't know the difference. If you're writing that next very high-profile application for iOS or Android, I would highly recommend you stick with MAUI or Uno as your platform of choice because you will get that better user experience. So that leads us to the question that everyone always asks, what's best? Please tell me which way to go. Well, as I said, they're all good choices. There's no bad choice here. So what you need to think about is this reach versus rich option. So do I want to have the most reach for my application, or do I want to have the most rich experience that I can offer? If we look at the left side of my graph for reach, absolutely build a browser-based application in Blazor. It will be able to run on any device because it's running in the browser, and every device has a browser. It'll run on Linux, Mac, Windows, iPad OS, any version of Android. It doesn't really matter. It's a browser app. So if you think about a jQuery app or an ASP.NET app, Blazor gives you more power, maybe more capability, but you can run it everywhere. If you're looking for something that really has that pixel perfect native experience, I would definitely recommend going with .NET MAUI or Uno. And this would be a pixel perfect native experience on a mobile device. If you just need to build a Windows app, there's no reason to use .NET MAUI or the Uno platform. Just use whatever framework you can target or use a Blazor Hybrid application, because the effort that you're going to go through to make this application work perfect on a phone might not translate perfectly to a desktop app if all of your users are using a desktop. If you want this mix of reach versus rich, I would recommend going the Blazor Hybrid route. You do a Blazor .NET MAUI application. What this will allow you to do is use all of your existing C# skills with markup to build and deploy a native application on any device. And you'll get the benefit of .NET MAUI and WinUI features as they grow, taking advantage of those with your application. So right now you'll get a great experience, and the future only promises to get better. What I would recommend is you take a look at the roadmaps of all of these competing platforms or complementary platforms, see how that fits with your development schedule, and if those features match, then I would go for it. At the end of the day, if you decide that you only need your application to run on Windows, it'll never leave that device, and it's a standard line of business app, you may just stick with WPF. You may look at WinUI. It's really up to you, but those are Windows-specific platforms. If you're looking at reach or native mobile experiences, these are the platforms like Blazor, Blazor MAUI, and Uno and the .NET MAUI platform. So let's take a look at a demo on how easy it is to build this type of application, a Blazor Hybrid app, and it'll tie together some of the concepts that we talked about, and we'll be able to see this run on a Windows as a WinUI app and as an Android application. So let's take a look at how we can put this together. Here I have Visual Studio, the Create New Project dialog open. This is running Visual Studio 2022 Preview. I'm going to search for the MAUI templates, and I want to create a MAUI Blazor application. And as you can see, I can create this for iOS, Android, Mac Catalyst, WinUI, and Tizen using Blazor. So all the Samsung devices will work beautifully with this .NET MAUI Blazor application. Let's click Next, And let's call this the Korea Conf demo. And we will just accept the defaults and we will click create. So once this application is created, we'll just run it and see what we get for the default. I'll go ahead and I'll click run, and this will build the application. This will embed the native web view as a MAUI component and compile to a WinUI app that will run on my machine. So I'll move this over. It started on my other screen. But you can see here, this is a native application running in Windows. I've got the same features and capabilities that I do from a default Blazor application, but you'll notice there's no right-click options, and I do get all of the debugging and windowing options that I would for a native WinUI or WPF application. So it's as easy as that. The next thing I can do is run this as an Android, and I do have an Android tablet installed for an emulator. So let's go ahead and run this, and you'll see that you get a very similar experience. I would recommend that if you are using emulators like Android, you have hardware acceleration turned on and have a little bit of patience, because the deployment can take a few minutes the first time that you run it. So in this case, my emulator popped up, but now the build, compile, and deployment will take a minute, and you'll see on the bottom of my screen the green bar will appear when it starts to deploy, and then my application will pop up. So now my application is deployed. It is loading in the emulator, and here I have my native Android application, which is actually a browser-based Blazor application in the web view running as a native component on the Android device. So very cool. I have all the capabilities and features that I would have gotten otherwise had this been just a regular old Blazor application. So let's go ahead and add some capabilities to this application. To get started with this application, I'm going to right-click on my project, and I'm going to manage NuGet packages. What I want to do is install the Ignite UI package from Infragistics. So I'm going to search for Ignite UI Blazor, select that, and install that to my project. These are our Blazor controls. Anyone can do this at home. Just go to NuGet, install Ignite UI for Blazor, and you can do exactly what I'm doing today. The next thing I need to do in my MAUI program CS, which is the .NET 6 minimal API approach, I'm going to delete this weather service that we saw in the other part of the application and add the Ignite UI to our builder so it lights up with Ignite UI Blazor in our application. So we're going to do a builder.services.add .services.add Ignite UI for Blazor, like so. And that's all I need to do here. The second thing I'm going to do is go to my imports.razor, and I'm going to do an @using Ignite UI .blazor .controls. Now I can use all the Blazor controls in my application. And then the final thing that I need to do is modify my index.html. So we've got the default style sheet for Blazor. The Ignite UI controls also use the Bootstrap Lite theme. And then finally, one last thing is there's an app bundle that we want to add to ensure that any interaction that happens between JavaScript and the platform can happen through the correct interop. So we have a bundle there, which you may or may not need. So I've updated those basic areas just to get this application running. And so now I can freely use any of these advanced controls anywhere in my app. So I want to go to Pages, and I want to go to Fetch Data. And this is the screen where we had the weather forecast service. I'm going to delete all of this markup here, and I'm going to delete the code. And the nice thing about Blazor is that you've got the code and the markup in the same file, and sometimes you don't even need any code. So what we do here is we use something called the IGB data grid and the IGB data chart. These are two controls that will allow you to deliver really rich experiences with hardly any code. So the first thing is we're just going to go ahead and type in IGB, and you'll see all of the Infragistics Blazor controls. We're going to look for the IGB data grid. So we'll go ahead and add that. Now inside the data grid, I want to set a few properties. So I'm going to set the width of this guy equal to maybe 85% of the screen. For the height, I want to set him to maybe 300 pixels. And we have a really cool way of acquiring data. So we have a data source object, and the data source accepts something called remote.json. So I can say remote.json, and I want to get that from a specific URL. Now I have a couple URLs I've already set up. This happens to be one of them. We've got a public site, XL2JSON, and this is going to return some JSON for me. If I click this, you can see the JSON that we're going to return and load into the grid. So this is actually live, real data that is coming from the web. Next, we're just going to copy this. So I'm going to copy the IGB data grid. And instead of the data grid, I want this to be the category chart. So the category chart is our charting product that allows you to do basically any type of business chart. And in this case, what I want to do is change out the URL that is pointing to this JSON file, and we're going to get a different JSON file. So I'll paste this in. I'll show you what this is going to look like. It is just category and inventory data like so. So let's go ahead and just run this, and you'll be able to see how easy it is to add more advanced controls like a data grid and a category chart to your application. So this will run as a Blazor hybrid app, a WinUI app, native running on Windows. So we'll slide this over, and if I click my Fetch Data screen, what we'll see is our grid and our chart. So the grid has all the features that you would expect, like scrolling. I have my Excel style filtering. I can do things like group by. So now I've just did a group by on this particular field. So I have collapse and expand. I can do things like move columns to the left or to the right, like so. I can do column summaries on this. I can deselect and select different options. But the idea is this is running as a native Windows app, and you can see that my chart, I've got zooming capability, panning capability, everything that you would expect in a control like this. It just happens to be running as a Blazor hybrid app running WinUI natively. Now let's change this over to our Android, and I'll run the same exact application. So let's go ahead and let that switch over. I'll click run. It's deploying and it is starting up, and we'll see the same thing that we saw earlier on the Windows machine. I have my data grid as well as my data chart all running in a native Android application. So very cool, just like that. A few lines of code and we have something running natively on multiple devices. What I do want to highlight is you'll notice in my application there's a platforms folder. If I drill into platforms, you'll see that each specific platform like Android, iOS, Mac Catalyst have app delegates that I can override. They have a program CS, just like the startup for a regular Blazor application, where I can do entry point type things like initiate objects, create variables, run functions, etc. And I can do this across every single application target. That's how easy it is to get a Blazor hybrid app going with Visual Studio 2022 Preview. So hopefully in that demo you saw how easy it is to create an application with .NET MAUI and Blazor as a Blazor hybrid application, and then run that application as a WinUI app or as an Android app. The amount of code that I used was minimal. In your enterprise apps, you'll probably write more code. You might even get into some device-specific capabilities. But at the end of the day, what I want you to think about is, do you need a multi-experience platform for your next application. You are an application developer. You're going to need the best tools that are available to you, and you do have options. You can use a Blazor hybrid app like I just showed you, or just as easy, we could have built a Maui application. I do want to highlight that Maui and Blazor are less mature than Uno, but they're supported by Microsoft. I will say that Blazor has made incredible strides in the last 2 years to be a real competitor in the enterprise space for modern single-page application apps that you need to build across your enterprise. No matter what, the good news for all of us is the .NET ecosystem is healthy. You have amazing options no matter which direction you go. And as I mentioned earlier, you might stay with WPF and you might be looking at Maui next year, but you should know what's available to you so you can build applications that run on native devices today with the .NET framework. With .NET 6 and then soon to be .NET 7, your options only get better, the capabilities and features only get better, and the performance only gets better. The future is very, very bright for .NET developers and the .NET dev community in Korea. So I want to thank you, and I want to highlight again the .NET dev community. Thank you for your support in Korea, and thank you for inviting me back to speak at this session of the .NET conference. And also, please, if you have any questions, contact Dong-Soo Joe, our APAC sales manager, djoe at infragistics.com. And of course, you can email me with any questions you might have about our products or this session. And finally, please check out the infragistics.co.kr website and learn about Infragistics Ultimate and all of the products that Infragistics offers. Thank you again, and I appreciate your time for this session of the .NET Conference. Have a great conference.